Hello and welcome to the SuperFriends review, where a few friends get together and you guessed it, review. I'm your host Trevor Aspenson, and I'm joined by my good friend John Strand.
Hello, everybody. Great to be here again.
And of course, my mortal enemy Troy Birch.
Hello, hello.
And today we are reviewing 2011's X-Men First Class. But before we get to that, let's find out what people have been watching here. I can go first again. This past week, I started Twin Peaks. I don't know if either of you guys have watched it, but I started the original series back in the 91 when it came out. I'm like 4 episodes into it, and it's one of the weirdest things I've ever seen in my entire life. It's also awesome, and it's funny, and it's just... it's overall recommendable. Apparently, it gets crazier and crazier in the new series that just came out, a few months ago or something like that, which is a continuation of the series. It's apparently supposed to be really good, too. So I'm pretty much all in on that right now. How about either of you guys? John, Troy?
Actually, I haven't watched anything new lately besides The Shape of Water, which... I don't know if you guys have seen it, so I don't want to say much about it, but it was okay. I don't think it was as good as it's, made out to be at the moment, but I rewatched Thor Ragnarok, which is always awesome, so.
Ooh!
Not a lot of time.
Excellent.
I definitely have not seen Shape of Water, but I heard Shape of Water is freaking amazing, and Thor Ragnarok is amazing, so touche.
Yeah, solid week of watching for you. I think Shape of Water had the most Oscar nominations, right?
Yep.
This year? Yeah, I thought so. Is that Guillermo del Toro, right?
Yep.
I literally know 0 things about it except for it's supposed to be amazing, and the cover makes me think of Abe Sapien from Hellboy, and I don't even know if that's accurate, but that's what I think of when I look at it.
And Doug Jones plays the same guy, too. He's the guy who played Abe Sapien, so that's funny.
Doug Jones, also the Silver Surfer. So.
Yep, for sure. Just a bunch of glamour roles.
I haven't really been watching a whole lot of anything. We're still in the cycle of all the CW superhero shows, and so like Arrow, I think, is the last episode I watched. They're pretty mediocre, and I usually laugh at the show that I'm watching. I've been working a lot on some action figure projects and playing some Assassin's Creed as well. So, I mean, been watching some superhero movies. Watched Batman vs. Superman again.
Ooh.
That was great. Can't wait to get to that one. I'm not watching a whole lot right now.
All right. Well, some mediocre television, always something to recommend. All right. Now, last week we did the comic book movie news, but this week we're going to skip it and jump straight to reviews/emails from the fans. And we have a review from an anonymous person named Josh Curry. All right. The host is hilarious, and I'm glad him and the beard guy finally had a disagreement. Also, love that there's a guy that looks like they brought in off the street and is just learning about comics. Ha 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 ha. This has a good comic geek feel and a comic movie enthusiast feel. 5 out of 5, dog.
All right.
Here's our first 5-star rating, you guys.
Wow, that's pretty good. I mean, I don't know what else to say about that.
Yeah, no, I think all the points are on brand. All right, well, we've got through the freaking boring rigmarole, so let's jump in to the movie X-Men First Class. And last week we did a trailer audio, and it was kind of less, it was more awkward than we anticipated, so we're going to skip that again. And we're going to jump straight into what you guys originally thought of the movie before watching it for the review this time. Either or.
All right. I mean, I'll go. Sorry if I cut you off there, Troy, but I remember being pretty enamored with this movie the first time I saw it. My expectations were fairly low, which is surprising because X-Men, when X-Men came out, the first movie, It didn't sell well. I don't think I even went to it in the theaters. And the first time I saw it was when it came out on DVD. And I remember that's where that movie kind of found new life. I think it was a big dud when it first came out. But that first X-Men movie I thought was great. X2, which I'm sure we'll get to at some point, but I really enjoyed that movie as well. And then X-Men: The Last Stand kind of took all the good ground that they made up and just kind of threw it out the window. And so I had very, very little expectation for what X-Men First Class could be. The timeline, I had questions about the fact that they committed to the period piece, the fact that they kind of rebooted it entirely with an almost new roster of X-Men. I really, really liked it when it first came out. And I guess you'll have to wait and see what I thought this time.
Troy?
Yeah, I totally agree. I liked it a lot when it came out. Like John just said, the reboot of the characters, and then obviously bringing in McAvoy and what's his name, Fassbender. Awesome. Yeah, I think I watched this movie probably like a year or two after it came out because I wasn't huge into comic books back then, but definitely enjoyed it a lot, especially compared to a couple of the other ones. So.
All right. So for me, I remember when this was coming out. I was pretty excited, but I wasn't super stoked, which is weird because pretty much any comic book movie does get me stoked. And it's probably because a lot of the same grounds John was just talking about is the X-Men 1 and 2 were so good, especially X-Men 2, that when X-Men 3 came out, and then 2 years later, 2009, X-Men Origins Wolverine came out, both of those just basically took all the goodwill away from the series that was there. They're rebooting it with a whole new cast, which kind of bummed me out because Patrick Stewart is Xavier, Ian McKellen is Magneto, Hugh Jackman's not even going to be in the movie. They're going to have almost none of the original actual X-Men in it of Cyclops, Storm, Jean. And at the same time, this was the year, it was 3 years after Iron Man came out, a year after Iron Man 2 came out, in the same year that Thor and Captain America First Avenger came out. And so by that point, I was just so all in on the MCU that I just didn't. I did go to it in theaters for sure because I go to every comic book movie in theaters, but I just didn't have maybe the fanfare I would have imagined with an X-Men movie. I did really like it, though. The period piece, the actors, the story, pretty much just got everything back on track. So that's kind of where I was with it. Now let's see if 7 years later any time has passed. All right. Now, in 1962, the United States government enlists the mutants with superhuman abilities to stop a malicious dictator who is determined to start World War III. It's the most basic plot synopsis that IMDb could offer. But so this is starring James McAvoy, Michael Fassbender, like Troy said, Jennifer Lawrence, Kevin Bacon, Nicholas Hoult, Rose Byrne, and then just a bevy of other actors. But now we can just jump in right away from the beginning of the movie. It starts with a recreation of the opening scene of X-Men, and we're introduced to both Charles and Eric within the first 5 minutes when they're children. One's in the Holocaust, the other's in their comfy home in I think it's Westchester. You guys got any thoughts on the introductions to our two protagonists?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the most interesting things about, the X-Men is the dichotomy of Xavier and Magneto, or Eric Lensher, I guess. Because both of them really want the same thing, right? They both want this survival of the mutant race. They go about it in very different ways. And I think that Magneto, at least for me, is one of the first villains where I totally can kind of understand where he's coming from. And they do such a beautiful, beautiful job of doing that within this piece, right? You see Magneto go through, this hardship and this pain and this terror. And you see Charles Xavier, who basically faces, no issues, right? There's nothing about his upbringing that causes him strife. There's no issues or problems that his powers get him into as well. And that's a huge theme of this movie, and I think that they set it up very well. And seeing that they were going to totally reboot everything made me a little nervous because the Holocaust is such a huge part of Magneto's character arc that I was worried that they were going to kind of abandon that. And so to start there, I thought was a really good choice, because it gives you agency and it gives you an understanding of why he makes the decisions that he does.
For sure. That opening scene, the two opening scenes that parallel each other, the Eric and Charles, just basically their childhood. I never really thought about it like this until I was watching it this a couple days ago, that their parallels are almost the same, is that they both want their mothers. We both meet them with one's being taken away from their mother. One of them just doesn't have their mother in their life because she must be doing other things. They don't give us a ton of backdrop, but just the idea that Charles' mother isn't really there for him either. But one is by force and one is by choice. And then the other parallel that really sinks in, that these two characters are almost the exact same characters, just from very different circumstances, is Eric is knocked out cold, and in that same transition, Charles is woken up by something in his own bedroom by himself. And it just kind of sets up the movie from there, and just kind of where the two characters are going to go from there, no matter how much they want in common. The circumstance alone has made it so they aren't going to be able to act the same way throughout the movie. Which brings us to Kevin Bacon's Footloose. And he brings him in. The opening of the original X-Men, which is cool and something I never really noticed, was when he does get knocked out in the original X-Men in was 2000 it came out. There's a little window shot you see, and there's a Nazi overlooking all of this. And then we don't get any more information on that, and then the story passes on, and Ian McKellen, Patrick Stewart, and all of that. But in this movie, it takes that scene and it shows us who that Nazi is, and it turns out it's not a Nazi at all. It's Sebastian Shaw, and he's there to manipulate Eric or something. Do you guys have any thoughts on this opening scene where we get introduced to the antagonist?
I mean, I never really knew that. I guess I didn't make that connection. I don't think I've watched that 2000 X-Men movie in many years, but that's really cool, kind of the faithfulness to the history, right? So giving it that same origin story and kind of focusing on those details makes it pretty interesting that they retread that same ground. You know, and for as many as the faults as the timeline has and the confusing nature of it, that little detail I think is really cool. So yeah, thanks for pointing that out, because I've never seen that before.
And I love, so we know from the original movies how powerful that Eric is. We know Magneto is one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful mutant that's out there, except for like Phoenix. They've told us in The Last Stand, but we're forgetting that. And so they bring us into this Sebastian Shaw's office. They show us a few different views of his office. It's him doing a recording or a record. Then it's him sitting at his chair with all these books and stuff behind him. He's got chocolate. Just looks like a really nice study office type situation. And after he realizes he can't get Eric to recreate his powers, and he says something about how the Nazis' methods do seem to work, that all of a sudden we get the camera spanning, and we realize it isn't just an office. It's also where they conduct experiments and torturing on people, and he has just a giant window to look in on all of that stuff, kind of almost setting the tone for who he is, no matter how nice he is, no matter how much he can say chocolate. He's really just a terrifying, terrifying person. And I think it's best described when Eric finally loses his mind and the anger comes out after they kill his mom, and these Nazis' skulls are getting crushed, the bell's crushed, everything is being crushed around him, and he's just maniacally so happy that this is all happening around him. And I don't know about you guys, but since I wasn't super, super jacked for this movie and originally came out, I didn't look into really like who Kevin Bacon was playing, what the overall plot of the movie was, just as a period piece. And so I didn't know he was a mutant at this point. I just assumed he was a mother effer and was just the bad guy who was going to put him on this track. And I guess kind of looking back at it now, those are definitely signs that he had no fear at all of Magneto, which kind of just, gives some stakes to the character right away, gives some power. I thought it was really awesome, shorthanded telling in the beginning of the movie.
Yeah, I thought it was weird, too, even rewatching it today, like that Eric didn't kill him at all. He killed both the guards, but left that guy untouched. And it still doesn't answer why. He's the one who killed his mom, but...
Yeah, I
like that.
I had the
same... one of the thoughts I had, too, yeah.
And so, this guy shoots his mom, and yeah, he crushes these nameless guards that are standing there, and then he goes to like a father figure almost. And so that part was really weird to me, where he's like, well, I guess my mom's dead, so this guy's my dad now. And so I wasn't really sure kind of what the methodology, I mean, obviously it's important to the story, but it just didn't make that much sense, especially because if now he's unlocking this power, like he's not this weak child. He's not somebody, who needs this strong hand. And so I don't know. It's a plot device, and it's a little bit of a strange situation, especially when they have all those Nazi torture devices and knives and butcher block and all that stuff in the next room that he easily could have just impaled Shaw with. Maybe if we saw some of his powers and he realized, maybe I can't kill this guy, right? And then there's this defeat. But obviously they wanted Shaw being a mutant himself. They wanted that to be a big reveal for later in the movie.
For sure. I literally, agree with everything you guys were both saying. Because when I first saw it, I was wondering why the heck he didn't kill him. And they do try to set it up to be the father figure with the chocolate. He's trying to be nice to him and all these things, but it just logically doesn't make sense that he would go with him. And they almost insinuate that they must have done adventures or something together, because almost the next scene when we get Eric, now he's a grown-up, we see him going to the bank with this Nazi gold that has the exact same Nazi symbol that the coin has that was given to him from Shaw, almost to insinuate that maybe they used to do this stuff together and go and get all this gold, silver, and stuff together, and he was just on these adventures with them. That's just kind of what I thought they were insinuating, but there was almost nothing there to give you that. But I thought all that stuff was what it is. But yeah, we fast forward then to 1962, and we get Charles Xavier in a bar.
Hold up. Before we go, do we want to talk about Charles meeting Mystique for the first time?
Oh, yes, we do.
Yeah, so, I mean, you could go ahead and set the scene for us there.
Yeah, so all it is like I said, with the parallel of him getting woke up in the middle of the night, what he's woken up to is his mother, and he goes down to the basement, and his mother's wearing this beautiful dress in the middle of the night for some reason, and he's just giving her a look like, what are you doing here? And we come to find out that it's really just Mystique in disguise, and she just saw a picture of his mom, but he knows it's not his mom, not even having to look inside her head, because his mom is never there. And then she shrinks down to her blue self, which I thought was, when I first saw it, I thought was kind of weird, and I thought it kind of looked weird, because we'd only ever seen Mystique as Rebecca Romaine, to be honest with you, a supermodel. She was almost a sex symbol in those original movies. She uses her stealth as much as her sexiness to do what she needed to do. And so now we're all of a sudden kind of seeing this character that was so strong in the original trilogy, all of a sudden stripped down of all of those things, figuratively and literally. And what we get is a naked Mystique in front of Charles.
Yeah, with maybe the most tremendous wig work I've ever seen in Hollywood. Yeah, but I mean, it's an interesting thing. I think, seeing Mystique as kind of this lost little creature, I think it's kind of interesting. Then we get that line where he says, "And you're not going to have to steal ever again." And she's like, "Cool, I'm living here now." And so I thought it was pretty interesting, right, to give her a little bit of a different past and give her kind of a cool character arc throughout the piece. But I mean, if there's another reboot of X-Men, which I'm sure with Disney buying Fox, there's going to be, I can't deal with this scaly reptilian Mystique again. The makeup, it looks so dated, and Jennifer Lawrence clearly in her contract that she can't wear that very often, because they're makeup and she wears it for about 2 minutes and then she's out of it again. And so I don't know. I think that there's definitely got to be a new way that they can do it, and I'm sure that they'll figure one out.
Yeah, I do agree with all that stuff. They're definitely just trying to do the haven't even said this yet, but this movie is basically trying to do a prequel and a reboot at the same time. So they are trying to keep similar elements from the Singer stuff, such as her being a naked all the time blue creature. But yeah, you're right. They probably should update that eventually. But I do like it that they do show this person, because she never, even though she's almost like the coolest character in X-Men 2, she never has almost any actual character development or character arc, except for that we know that she hates humans because she was treated a certain way, almost like Magneto was. So getting to see this version of her where she's a desperate little girl who's alone and who looks like a monster instead of a supermodel, it really just kind of almost puts you in her place of how alone and scared she would be in that frame. And then we get to fast forward to James Bond, a.k.a. Eric Lencher, going on Nazi hunting, these are probably my second favorite stuff in the entire movie is when he's out by himself and he's out there looking for Shaw. And so he goes to the bank to find the initial guy. And all of these people are just people that must have worked under Sebastian Shaw, and they have information on Shaw. Mm-hmm. You guys got any comments about the two Nazi hunting scenes?
So, it's funny is I rewatched this, and I don't know if the subtitles are supposed to be in the movie when they're speaking German, but I watched it online and there were no subtitles. But during a lot of like that bar scene, I had no idea what they were saying.
There's a good probably 20 minutes of subtitles in this movie that you just missed out on, man.
Yeah, I missed out a lot, and I couldn't find it.
That is amazing.
Built into the movie, like even if it's online streaming, but
that's hilarious.
That impaired me a little bit.
Oh, that is hilarious. All right, John, do you got any comments on those two scenes?
I watched the movie with my family yesterday morning, and so my son Jack is 5 years old, and so the thing that kind of jumped out at me is the brutality of those scenes in the movie. And so he looked away, and I had him close his eyes for most of the scenes that Magneto was in the movie for probably the first hour of the movie. That scene where he pulls that dude's metal filling out of his face, that's one of the craziest things I've ever seen. And then obviously the knife work and the tension of the bar scene where they drink the German beer and he has those comments, my family's name was taken from them by, tailors and by pig farmers. Ooh. And it really made me think of Inglourious Bastards, the scene where, what is her name, Shoshana in that movie?
That sounds right.
Where she's hiding under the floorboards and there's just this tense talking. That I thought was something that they carried off very well. And then superhero movies, there's really no tension. There's rarely any tension because you know kind of how things are going to go. And the fact that they magnified it so well right there, I thought was really, really cool. And so you see him just hunting these people that have wronged him. And Magneto's supposed to be a villain, right? He's supposed to be the bad guy. But in those moments, like, you cheer him, right? Because you recognize his quest for revenge, and you start to understand that. These shirts all the time that say Magneto was right, and I think this movie does a really good job of showing why people think that way.
Yeah, tension's the one word that I would use to describe both of those, and the fact that just the little touches, such as he gets the information he was looking for from that bank teller, and then he still rips his tooth out or is filling out just to remind the audience like he's doing this for a reason, but he's also does have that darkness under him still. And yeah, like you said, the moment where he throws the knife and immediately zips it back to him and then pulls his hair back, takes another drink of his beer. Oh, it is just, that whole scene is exhilarating. It's cliche to say, but I could watch an entire movie of Michael Fassbender hunting Nazis down all day.
Just wrecking shop. And I don't know about you, but that tooth filling scene, as he walks out of the door, all I was expecting was him to just shoot that right through the guy's head and kill him with his own filling in his tooth. I was a little bit perturbed because now that Nazi guy is just living, just like existing. But I don't know. That is some of the best action in the movie. And when, there are people with these visually arresting powers later on in the movie, I still think that that's probably the best action scene the whole movie has to offer.
Agreed. All right, and then we do get to Charles Xavier, our freaking professor himself, at the bar, talking to a woman with two different colored eyes and flirting with her. You guys got any comments on the early Charles scenes? Troy, did you have comments for that?
I did actually. Yeah, I don't know. I want to say one quick thing, going back to the last scene about the filling. Kind of off topic, but does Magneto have like senses, kind of like Spidey senses, but like where he can sense there's metal? Like he like
Yeah, I think so. Like he
he knew
he
there was
can
metal in his
feel it,
mouth,
he can sense it.
so he can
What's
like
that?
he can like sense it. He has like an overwhelming sense of like if there's metal like near him even.
Yeah, he does.
That's cool. That makes a lot of sense then.
They give a couple lines in some of the X-Men movies about him being able to feel the metal, like when he rips the metal out of the guy's blood in the second one. He can just feel that he's got more iron in his blood that day. It's just like it's almost like a character that can control elements. He's just like one with that element, basically.
And like hypersensitive to it and everything.
For sure. That is so cool. That's a good question because I didn't even really think about it like that, but that's definitely what it is. It's him just sensing the metal in his mouth.
That's cool.
Yeah, so going back to good old Xavier, kind of a creep. Like we're introduced to him and he's using his intelligence and he's using his mind reading to, hit on these girls, right? He reads her mind to know what kind of drink she likes. And we see him use that same line, the heterochromia line, later on. It's a mutation. He uses that with Rose Byrne when he talks about her auburn hair. And so we see he's just kind of a sleazeball, kind of this player. And man, I don't know if this is intentional, but in no part of this movie do I side with him. And in no part of this movie do I believe that he's more than just this petulant kid that tries to get things his way and tries to get people to take the higher ground in a world where that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, right? And so, I don't know, man. And again, like I said, the dichotomy of Magneto and Xavier is one of my favorite things in comics. And they really, really heavily, for me at least, they really heavily place the ball kind of in Magneto's court, and he's the one that I root for throughout the whole movie.
Yeah, to just kind of jump on the back of what you were saying there, even though it's almost like the Johnny Storm situation, where I do like him all throughout, just because he's like a super charming dude. I definitely understand we should not be liking him. The one thing that he does pretty consistent throughout the first half of this movie especially is does go into people's head without asking or any permission to go into their head and read their minds and things like that, just completely invasive of their privacy, which is obviously gross. He ignores Mystique basically throughout this whole thing. He's just, like you said, he's a petulant child. He's somebody who has been really rich and privileged his whole life, and even though he wants to help and do good, he's still so focused on him and just himself and his own point of view that he does not really open to almost anything Mystique says to him, and just, using powers and intelligence to pick up women. But he is charming, so I liked it.
Yeah, right. And to piggyback again off of what you just said, in like throughout the movie, he's supposed to be this champion of mutants, right? And one of the things that they repeat is this idea of mutant and proud. And every time Mystique talks to him about, would you be with me this way? Would you look at me, the same if I were blue all the time? And he's like disgusted or revolted by the way that she looks when she's, normal, when she's in her Mystique mode. And that was such a weird, I guess, movement away from who he is in the comics. And I don't think it's bad. I just think it's fairly interesting that they play him off as this person that is almost ashamed of mutation. And he's able to be that way because he can hide it, right? And people don't know that he's a mutant kind of visibly. And again, that's something I think this movie does really well, is talks about those two different groups, mutants that can hide their mutations and mutants who can't. And it deals pretty heavily with that concept.
Yeah, he has a hard time understanding when people need stuff that he already has. He has a hard time, with that perspective. I think, honestly, to piggyback off the piggybacking,
We're stacking.
I think this whole movie is almost Magneto's origin, where this is not Professor X's origin. We do get some origin story, and then we can get to the end when that hits and the things I have to say about that. But I think that an actual arc in this movie, and I heard this, I either read or heard this somewhere, is that if you were watching this movie for the first time without any prior X-Men knowledge, is that you would assume that Eric is going to turn out to be the good guy at the end who overcomes this anger and rage he has, whereas the sleazy rich guy who doesn't let the mutant be her own self is probably going to turn out to be the bad guy. And that's how it's played through almost the entire first half of the movie, which I think it's just interesting because, just goes against everything we know and what we should be cheering for, but it's making probably what makes X-Men good in the first place is making you ask questions that normally this type of medium would make you ask, which is cool.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think clearly Magneto is, the Wolverine style character of this trilogy. And X-Men and X2 and The Last Stand, clearly Wolverine was the main character, right? And everybody else was just kind of surrounding him. And we definitely see that with Magneto in this trilogy, especially, I kind of forget about Days of Future Past, what his role is there. But in X-Men Apocalypse, that's clearly a Magneto story. Like, he's at the center of it. And we'll follow his arc probably as we do more of these. But yeah, Magneto, I think, is the central character of this whole piece.
Yeah, I think it goes First Class Magneto, Days of Future Past Charles, Apocalypse. Also, one last thing I wanted to mention, just because I thought this was a cool little tidbit, is the suit that Eric Lencher, that Magneto's wearing when he goes to the bank, is one of the same exact suits that Sean Connery wears in Goldfinger, which is so awesome because apparently Matthew Vaughn, a ton of this is taken almost directly from different James Bond references, and that is a direct reference, which I thought was awesome.
Wow, that's crazy.
And then we go to Moira going to a club to meet the Hellfire Club, which she, of course, one of my favorite points in the movie is when Rose Byrne decides she doesn't need to be wearing the amount of clothing she was just previously wearing, which was a Matthew Vaughn choice, which I approved. And then, but yeah, she works for the CIA, and she's following Colonel Henry, I believe. You guys remember why she's specifically following Colonel Henry?
I
don't remember the setup for this.
Yeah, I don't know. I think they believe that the whole backdrop of this is, the Cold War. And so I think maybe he was somebody who was blacklisted or who was seen as maybe a communist sympathizer. And so I think maybe he was on a list for some reason, and so they were following him. Okay. And ultimately they were getting ready to vote on whether or not they should install missiles in Turkey or something like that. And so their commitment to the angle of, real history of war, I thought was an interesting choice, because, like I said, I was watching it with my 5-year-old son, and those scenes were not very riveting for him. Nuclear disarmament and all those different concepts. And so, I thought it was cool to give it much more of a realistic flair and made it more of a kind of a spy thriller movie at points as well. But yeah, that's why she was following him with those, those assets that the CIA didn't give her.
And then we go in, we meet the Hellfire Club, which is Azazel, Riptide, January Jones, aka Emma Frost, and Sebastian Shaw. You guys got any thoughts on this main crew we're getting here for the bad guys?
Who?
One of my notes by Riptide says who? What?
Troy, you not being the comic book guy, what did you think about those characters?
I wasn't really taken back with them that much. Obviously, I like Betty Draper in there. But see, I didn't know any of those guys at all. So
you are not alone. And so I'm the guy that comes in with this comic book knowledge. And Riptide, never have heard of him. I was like, maybe this is Whirlwind or Weather Wizard, and I was like, I think some of those are from DC because this guy is so unforgettable. Don't think he has a line in the entire movie, but God, who's the guy? He looks like from 10 Things I Hate About You. He looks like the scuzzy boyfriend, and that's all I could think of the whole time. But Azazel is cool. He's kind of bargain basement Nightcrawler, and so they're like, the timeline, we can't use Nightcrawler, but let's basically color him red and use him. From the comics, Azazel is cool and everything. But good old January Jones as Emma Frost. is maybe the most criminal casting I've ever seen in a superhero movie. If there was somebody who's supposed to be so magnetic and just, this woman who commands attention, it's Emma Frost. And she's, hard-edged, and she is, she's severe as a woman, and knows kind of what she wants and does anything to get it. And January Jones is just so wooden. Oh my gosh, she has no emotion. She has no, she doesn't act at all. She basically just phones in her lines. And then she turns into diamond form. And oh my God, that is truly the worst looking CGI I've ever seen in my entire life. Not to mention the fact that she's wearing a white bra, and that just turns to diamond too, for some reason. Don't know if that's how clothes really work, but man, it was distracting every scene that she was in.
And I got a question for you too: is she actually diamond, or is she like glass diamond, or like?
She's supposed to be diamond, right? She's supposed to be this hardened substance, and so she's unbreakable when she turns into that. You can't read her mind or penetrate her mind. The trade-off is that she loses her telekinetic and telepathic abilities when she's in diamond form. But yeah, she's supposed to be kind of this hard, rigid, unbreakable substance, which obviously is this reflection of who she is inside as well. We talked about that with Fantastic Four. And I think X-Men does a really good job of taking personality traits and making their powers manifest in that way as well.
Yeah, the Emma Frost thing honestly probably makes me the saddest. I had a short stint in comic book reading like 10 years ago for a couple of years, and I didn't really read anything of Emma Frost, but anything I've heard from any comic book fan is she is one of the, especially in the past like 15, 20 years, they said she just has become one of the absolute mainstay, most powerful written characters, and there's just, you get none of that from her. She's supposed to be smart, maybe a little conniving. You're just, like you said, taking the words from her. She's wooden. Everything she's doing is flat. There's supposed to be some, I don't know, sass behind some of the things she says, and just none of it comes off. She's not threatening. She's honestly, she shouldn't be just as forgettable as Riptide, but she's just as forgettable as Riptide, which is so unfortunate. Azazel, I'm all in on Azazel, even though he's not getting almost anything to work with at all. Just purely on character design, because my favorite X-Men is Nightcrawler, and maybe John will tell us a little something about him later or something, but he literally is just a red Nightcrawler, and I love the Boomf freaking teleporting so much, and they do some cooler stuff with it later on when the X-Men First Class have kind of got together or whatever in that facility. They do some cool stuff with him. And one thing I read is that the tail was never at one point a practical effect throughout the entire movie, and it was always a CGI effect, which I thought was pretty cool because that was something I never really noticed.
Yeah.
And then the rest of his stuff was all practical. So I thought they did a good job with him. And like I said, all I wrote was who, what by his name, and that was all I can possibly bring to that conversation. Because why? I'm pretty sure all they tried to do for these guys, and specifically the X-Men we're going to talk about here in a minute, is they just tried to figure out who can we bring into this that we haven't used and won't really interfere with the continuity of X-Men 1 and X-Men 2. Because they're basically trying to ignore Last Stand and Origins Wolverine to this point by then. So I liked the people enough that they got. The casting was off on Emma Frost, and the Riptide was a nothing. But I like all that.
To go back to Azazel, I mean, it makes sense that he is like Nightcrawler because he was written in a lot later. I think he's a character that was introduced after Nightcrawler, but we find out that he is Nightcrawler's father, which gives us an understanding of why he has those abilities. And I always forget about this, and they go back and forth on this, but I'm pretty sure Mystique is also Nightcrawler's mother. So the fact that those two, are in such close proximity in this movie, I think is really cool. And like you said, they have to avoid using characters they've used before. And so people like the Blob and people like Pyro, these kind of B-list Brotherhood of Evil Mutants characters that would have been much more, obvious and probably interesting choices. They just simply couldn't use them. And so I get kind of where they're coming from for sure. And the fact that they basically had no speaking lines for any of those people was beneficial as well.
Yeah, does Riptide say a single word in the movie?
I don't think so. All I can think of is when he gives that menacing look as he makes his little tornado in his hand, and then he just gets wrecked by that door by Magneto at the end. That's honestly the only things I remember from him.
All right. And then the next part of the movie is where we start to get introduced to, Moira meets Charles at the bar. He tries the pickup technique that he was using on the girl, finds out that she's with the CIA, and he's looked inside her head because he has no qualms about doing that with strangers, and sees that she's seen mutants. And so she brings him to the CIA and everything, which is where they eventually will meet Hank McCoy and get to see Cerebro. Do we have any thoughts on any of the meetings there? Or I can't remember if anything interesting happens during any of that stuff.
Yeah, I think it's just typical, hey, the world's going to end and we have all this information that can help you. And if you listen to us, we'll thwart this natural disaster. And everyone's like, I don't believe in mutants. You're lying. You're crazy. Get out of here. And so, that's the typical kind of superhero introduction before they believe in any of these things. But yeah, I mean, once we get to the Institute and meet Hank, I think that's pretty cool. And we see Cerebro, and we have the first of many, maybe Professor X is going to be bald at some point, jokes that they had in the movie. But yeah, I think the CIA kind of introduction, I thought, it made sense in context and it worked. And so I'm excited to talk a little bit more about Hank if you guys are ready to do that.
Dude, I'm down to talk about some Hank. I did really like the small touch of Charles outing him in front of the other people, just being a mutant or whatever, since obviously these are all parallels of just people that are supposed to be segregated from the populace or whatever. So just a little don't ask, don't tell joke he says right after that. I think that's a really good whatever, just to get into the movie, just to keep those parallels going. Pretty much everything with Nicholas Hoult I like in this movie. I think he's an awesome Hank McCoy.
And it takes like the coincidence of another mutant being there, and it makes it much more interesting, right? The fact that he was working there as a scientist and not as a mutant, I thought did a lot to kind of enhance the credibility of really how smart Hank is, and really gave him a believable reason for actually being there rather than just setting up the construction of this team.
And we also get a tiny bit more Mystique character arc where she comes forward with a big smile when Charles does out him and realizes that he's hiding in plain sight just like she always does. Even they're both two attractive people, they finally found out that like Charles overlooks the fact that maybe Beast doesn't want to be out, and he always overlooks the fact that Mystique has to constantly be hiding, and just doesn't really put these together where these two see each other and they see that they're both scared to be themselves, which makes them want to be themselves around them type of thing. And just they don't do a ton with the relationship throughout the movie, but I do like the idea that they're going for with the Hank and Raven's characters in those moments. And Jennifer Lawrence and Nicholas Hoult are both good enough actors that they can just pull off almost any subtle little acting they need to do in those scenes.
Well, and they're together. Are they still together, or they were at that point? They were dating for a pretty long while they were filming these movies.
Yeah, I know they aren't together anymore. I know she was just dating Darren Aronofsky.
There you go. Nice.
If we want to get a little pop culture references in here, right, guys? Huh?
We gotta know. We gotta know about the love life of these X-Men.
I didn't know they were dating ever, to be honest.
Yep, they met in this movie, and so did Michael Fassbender and Zoe Kravitz, and they dated for a while.
Wow.
Oh my gosh, that was who that is, Zoe Kravitz.
Yeah,
I was watching the whole movie and I was like, I recognize this woman, but
yeah, I didn't write a ton about her, but that was one of the things I got.
I think the arc of Mystique and Beast is so cool because the Cure, which is obviously a huge part of X-Men lore, and we saw that with Angel and with Rogue in the previous trilogy, but the fact that Beast and Mystique are kind of spearheading this quest for a cure, and Mystique is consistently asking for and trying to figure out a way to get rid of her blue self and to get rid of that element of her mutation. And Hank also wants to just be normal, right? And it's interesting because if he wears shoes, nobody can tell that there's anything wrong with him. And so, his need is far less dire than hers is. But as the movie progresses and continues, you see that she comes to terms with it and realizes that this is a gift and this is something we need to embrace and something we need to take in. And ultimately, it's him that gives into it. And so, much like Charles, we see that this man that should be, interested in this, and this man that should be celebrating these mutations is so horrified by his own that it totally overtakes his scientific brain and overtakes the curiosity that he has as a scientist with the shame that he has over having a hand foot, I guess.
Yeah, he's one of the characters that I like the most in this movie, but I also probably the most frustrated with because of I just feel like everything in his story is just jammed in a little too much, and it's just a little too subplotty where I'd want it to be more main plot, especially at the end when we get to that. It's just all a little rush for me because I do think it is almost as interesting as all of the Charles and Eric stuff is the Raven and Hank stuff. They just don't give it the proper time to breathe and to process. But I'm down for all of that. And it comes back to the Charles Eric thing again, where Eric is in Raven's corner the whole time. He's backing her up. So eventually she does find that inner strength she needs, even if it's from the bad guy. Whereas Charles isn't even paying attention to what's going on in them. And he's just looking after Eric, which is a good thing. But since he is just looking after Eric, Hank never really finds that inner strength to really accept himself until there's no other choice but to accept it. And then if we want to fast forward to Days of Future Past, maybe he never did come to accept it, that part of him. So I think all of that stuff is interesting. I think they set all of it up pretty well for another movie and another arc. And I think, just this beginning scene with them both subtly being happy with each other does a lot to sell a lot of that. Yeah. With almost no dialogue.
Yeah, that's true, right? And so there are, for a superhero movie, there are a lot of things that this does really, really, really well.
Yeah, weighty themes, which is probably one of the things X-Men's always done best in the comics, I would assume.
Yeah, for sure, right? And the nicest thing is that the fact that they're mutants as outsiders and that they're socially not accepted, it works on so many levels, right? Obviously, I think it was a play off of, the civil rights movement at that time. Clearly now we see with the don't ask, don't tell joke, there's much more about kind of, the gay community and their acceptance and finding the beauty of who they are. I think there are the messages that kind of comes from it. And so I think that the fact that they're able to adapt and be, I guess, relevant in any society, I think is really interesting about the X-Men.
Agreed. All right. And then the next thing that happens is we get Eric and Charles finally meeting before they start going on their little recruiting montage, which is a small moment. One of my favorite moments in the movie is when Charles realizes somebody's in the water. Somebody's trying to pull a submarine. We've seen him earlier in the movie have a hard time moving a coin. Then he can move the coin, and then he can throw a knife, and he's slowly getting stronger. But now we're seeing him trying to pull a submarine, and we're kind of getting the idea that maybe he can't do it, but he's willing to die. And it reminded me of a line from The Last Jedi where Rose tells Finn that we aren't going to win by killing what we hate, by saving what we love. And that's exactly what Charles does in that moment, is he goes down and basically tells Eric, like, hey, there'll be other times for this. Let's just regroup and let's do this. And that's almost the catalyst for them becoming the friends that they do throughout the movie, which was just an awesome side little moment that is honestly maybe probably my favorite moment in the movie. But then after that, they go recruiting for some mutants, use Cerebro. What do you guys think of any of the X-Men that they recruit? We got Alex Summers, a.k.a. Havoc. We got Banshee. I can't remember Banshee's real name.
Sean Cassidy.
Ooh!
I think that might just be a singer. Let me check. I think it's Sean Cassidy.
And that's Darwin, and we got Angel as well. You guys got any thoughts on any of the 4 X-Men that are recruited?
Sean Cassidy is correct. Troy, why don't you tell us what you think, and I'm going to check something else.
Random question: is that actor that plays Banshee? Is he in Punisher? Is he the? No. What is he in? That something super recent.
Get Out. He plays the brother in Get Out.
Get Out. Because he's definitely. Well, it's irrelevant, but
he was in American Made, that Tom Cruise movie.
Oh, he was the
brother.
Yeah. Little
dirtbag.
Yeah, big time dirtbag. No, I mean, I liked. I mean, see, I didn't know any of these people either. Obviously, going into this, I like Darwin's character a lot, and we'll get into that more. It's pretty cool. Angel, I mean, she's kind of a butterfly, but she can shoot fireballs. I thought that was pretty badass. I mean, yeah, I didn't know a lot about him, so I didn't really have a huge opinion on him, but I was disappointed that they didn't pick up Wolverine, but it was cool that they gave a little trope and threw him in there.
Yeah, I forgot to even write that down. That was one of the moments I remember watching in theaters, because everybody lost their minds when he showed up for just that 1 second. Tells them to what, go F themselves?
Yeah.
Yep. Right, and so that Wolverine cameo I thought was cool, and I think it sets the tone of saying, hey, we don't need Wolverine because this is a new trilogy. And then Days of Future Past happens, and they needed Wolverine apparently. I don't know. I thought that the team was pretty cool, right? Initially, I do remember the first time I saw this, I was mad because it's X-Men First Class, and this isn't the First Class, right? If you look back at the original comics, they didn't choose to have the inaugural Xavier Institute class. But, I mean, I got over that pretty quickly. I thought Banshee, I think, is a really cool character that doesn't get enough love. Havoc being the other Summers boy and kind of being, you know, one of the leaders of the X-Men before Cyclops is even, you know, around in the universe, I think is pretty interesting. Darwin, I thought was awesome, except for he was like a 30-year-old cab driver. And I don't know, Angel I thought was interesting. That's what I was just looking up, right? Because Angel has such resonance, obviously, in X-Men because of Angel and Archangel. And so I thought that was weird. She's from the new X-Men. And she has a second name called Tempest. And so I thought it would have been way more interesting to have her go by that name just to kind of avoid some confusion. But, I mean, it's clear why they chose her as, you know, the most no-name character, because when there's the big switch that happens, the big betrayal that happens, they didn't want it to be anybody that you actually cared about. So, I don't know. I thought the cast was pretty cool. And it allows... We've talked about how there are so many origins and so many characters they have to shoehorn in here. To have characters that you don't really care all that much about making up the rest of the team, it leaves a lot more room for Charles and for Magneto. And so I thought that was a pretty smart move on the filmmaker's part.
Oh, yeah, I wanted to ask you, is the Alex Summers arc, that's basically just straight up Scott, that's Cyclops' arc, right? Is that he's always too scared of his powers, or is that Alex Summers things too? Because that's Cyclops' younger brother in the comics, right?
Yeah, right. And so Cyclops' thing is his power manifests when he's playing and he falls and he hits his head and he gets this irreparable brain damage that is what disallows him to control his powers, right? So he wrecks something in his brain, and so his optic blasts are always on. That's why he has to wear the visor. And so, yeah, he's terrified of his powers. He can't control them. He's ashamed of them because he hurts people that he loves. So, yeah, they basically took that element of his character and didn't give him any of the burden of leadership or any of those types of things. And so Cyclops is a character that kind of swings, and he's either like a favorite or kind of a least favorite of everybody. And so, I don't know. They gave him a pretty interesting part of Cyclops' story, I think.
Yeah, what I got from a lot of this, because we talked about some of the other X-Men releases, obviously, throughout this, but what we know they were going to do is after the original trilogy, they assumed that they were done making the X-Men movies, and so what they were going to do was just make all of their spin-offs, and they did the Origin Wolverine, and it didn't quite go the way they wanted to, and so they were going to make a Magneto or Origin, and they were going to make a X-Men Origin of just the origin of the actual team. And we can kind of see that both of those ideas just basically got combined into one giant script. And so what I'm assuming they did is they just literally took out Cyclops and put him in there and put Alex in there because at that point it made no sense continuity-wise. And I'm thinking they were doing that because at the end of Origins, they were going so out of their way to set up Cyclops was there, Emma Frost was there, Charles is picking them up. I think there's a girl with white hair that's in there. Basically, they're just setting up that the X-Men are being picked up. And now they just need to, like the random bad guy characters, is they just need to find characters that their powers are going to look cool and will make sense within the story. So with that, I do like Havoc. I've always liked his character design in the comic books. I think Banshee is a super interesting guy to put on live action just because we've never really seen any powers done like that. And just the idea of somebody using their voice to fly is realized so freaking well in this movie a couple times. Darwin, like you guys both said, Darwin is a really cool character. I wish he'd have been one that got to be around longer, maybe in other sequels, just kind of dive into just more of who he is, just because the way his powers looked, I really enjoyed. Angel, I thought was kind of a nothing character. I did think it was kind of cool. She could spit fireballs and stuff. We just didn't know much about her or much about her personality that I wasn't super interested in. We've seen plenty of characters fly and stuff, so I wasn't really all in on her.
And it seemed like her power reveal was just another quick kind of sex passion that they could use. You know, go to a strip club and find her there. And so it was very similar to why all of the women of the Hellfire Club were walking around in their bra and panties, just sex out. We see that there also.
Director's choice.
Yeah, right.
And then so after that, we get first, I don't even know if you guys can answer this question for me. How did we get from nobody in the CIA trusting mutants at all to Eric and Charles being sent on that mission to Russia to find Shaw, but Shaw's not there, and then Eric runs it himself anyways, and it's just like them with those random one thing of army soldiers. I don't even understand how we get there.
They just go, right? And so they're not sanctioned, but Rose Byrne just goes. And the agent, who I always forget who he actually is, but Charles is like, does his little mind power, and the guy's like, all right, let's get going.
Oh, it's the guy from Lake Placid.
Yeah, yes. She just kind of commandeers it, and it's a real Rogue One situation where she just takes her own personal army against the wishes of the CIA, and they go in to search for Shaw on their own.
Yeah, I was just, all of a sudden, I was just like, where is this even coming from in this? But okay, and then the next thing we get is another freaking montage. This montage I'm really, really digging, though. Oh, wait, no, right before this, actually, we get Shaw attacking where all of these X-Men characters that just had gotten drunk, that had just gotten kind of shamed by Charles and Eric, and they'd all just given each other their names by getting wasted, which I kind of thought was a cool little touch.
Yeah, that part was so cool, right? Because it explains why they have these cheesy names, right? It's just kids that are like, hey, if we're going to be superheroes, we got to have code names. I thought that part was really cool.
Yeah, I don't like how they shamed him so much, like, just for having fun. Like, these kids are about to go on some big mission. It's risky, and it's like they can't have one night of just hanging out, goofing off, and...
I agree. They're characters that all feel so alone and isolated all the time, and now they found all of these people that accept who they are because they're similar, and Charles still can't really see that what they're doing is bonding and everything, which is...
So Dad had to come in and make sure there was no fun being had.
And then he leaves them all there again.
Yeah.
He doesn't care about anything but what he's doing throughout the whole picture. But then during that, the Charles and Eric trying to get to Shaw. Shaw's not there, and Shaw ends up attacking the base where they all, the X-Men are. And in that moment, we get the stripper, Angel. She decides she's going to go with the characters. After this is where Azazel Is it Azazel? Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah, well, that's how they pronounce it.
Yeah, okay. And so this is where you're just kind of all of a sudden hearing these noises, loud thumps happening out the window, and you realize that Azazel's just grabbing people and then booming to the freaking middle of the sky and then dropping them and then grabbing another one, dropping it, which I thought was awesome because that's terrifying to think about.
That part was really cool.
And then Shaw's coming in, and all of the human guards, this just show us how good of people they are. They're saying they'll give up all the mutants as long as you let us normal people live. And there's that moment that's in the trailer. That's one of the coolest visual moments and kind of just shows us how powerful Shaw really is they shoot a rocket launcher at him, like absorbs the rocket, and then slowly freaking blows up everything around him in such a cool span-around shot, which, yeah, it's kind of his big moment of the movie. And I thought looked visually, some of the visuals in this movie have gotten a little bumpy, especially like the Emma Frost change and a couple of those things, but I thought that moment looked awesome. I liked pretty much all of this stuff that was happening with Shaw attacking.
Yeah, right, because absorbing energy is a power that visually is really hard to convey. And it'd be easy for him to just glow or like his eyes to light up. But the fact that he multiplies and his hands come in and there's that shaking effect, I thought looked pretty cool. Does he have the helmet by this point already?
Yes, he does, because he isn't sure that he isn't there, and then he takes it off and says, I can take this dumb thing off.
Yeah, right. And so the line where he says, this is a gift from my friends in Russia. So, like, why? Why did the Russians make this? And if the Russians don't believe in at all, what was the impetus to create this thing? So the origin of Magneto's helmet is like, oh, it's a fashion gift from Russia to block out telepaths, which they don't know exists. I thought that part was dumb. However, the helmet itself looked really awesome.
Agreed. That was one of the best exposition lines I've ever heard in my entire life. If they're going to give us the origin for the helmet, just give us a little effort in it, please.
This is a gift from my friends in Russia. What? Excuse me?
Maybe if they could have been like a Nazis or something, somebody who knew something about mutants or something, but yeah.
Been doing experiments on mutants,
Yeah, they'd set some of that up too. They could have dropped any line of dialogue besides the one that they did.
What's the actual origin for that helmet in the comics, John? Does it explain?
That's a great question. When Magneto was introduced, he just has it, and so we learned pretty quickly that it's able to block telepathy and all those things. And so I'm not really sure where it comes from. I'm sure there's got to be an issue that talks about it, though. But like I said, Magneto is already established. All of them basically are already established in the first issue of the comics. And so that's an interesting thing that I'd like to kind of read about now that I made fun of it and have no understanding of what the actual basis is.
I hope it is a direct quote from the comics, the Russia.
Hey guys, I'm from Russia.
But then, so after that, Eric and Charles get back, and they realize everything that's happened, and they realize they're going to have to train this army, but they're just kids, not anymore. And so we get another training montage. And
wait,
Vaughn can do anything. It's montages.
Yeah, right.
So we got to step back because
right.
Before this started is freaking Darwin dying.
Oh yeah.
And the reason I care so much because I was reading about it that in the comics Darwin's a bigger character and he like fights Hulk. He's like able to like absorb his or adapt and like absorb the punches because he can adapt to live.
Mm-hmm.
And he just dies from this blast, which is crazy.
I had no idea that, like, because I never heard of a ton of these people from before this movie, and I didn't ever hear of Darwin. So I didn't know that he fought the Hulk or any of that stuff. Is he a pretty interesting character in the comics, John? Have you read anything with him before?
Yeah, he's pretty cool, I think, right? He's a character that obviously empowers somebody that doesn't have a very clearly offensive power set. And so the fact that he's able to just kind of survive everything gives him this everyman quality and carries this idea that it doesn't matter, how many times you fall down, it's how many times you get back up, and all those cheesy kind of, instilling of hope messages, right? But I don't know. I think that he's so interesting, right? He says to him, my power is that no matter what happens to me, I can't die, and I'll adapt to survive. And he dies less than 10 minutes later.
It just doesn't make any sense. I mean,
it does, right? Because here's this unkillable person, and Shaw is able to murder him, right? And so what chance do the rest of us have? So I get kind of what they're going for, but it came at the expense of one of the most interesting characters. Now, cynically, his mutation probably cost the most to do in CGI, and so maybe that's why they had to kill him off fairly early. But yeah, I don't know. It just seemed kind of useless.
yeah.
They needed a character that would defect. They needed a character that would die, and so it didn't really matter who it was going to be.
And like you said, they're doing it. They did it to that specific character, especially now knowing like the fighting Hulk thing. It just shows how powerful he is. We just got done seeing him kill all of these humans, these bazookas. It shows we think we've seen all of his power, and he can kill an unkillable man. So that's definitely what the setup is for it. It's just I don't understand why you take that interesting of a character and have him being in the movie for that long, when you have all these super uninteresting characters that make it from beginning to end. But then we get to the training montage, which I am into quite a few moments from this. This is where we finally get to see Banshee learn how to use his voice to fly, which we get a couple funny moments with that, of course. And we get Charles tapping into Eric's emotion. We get Alex Summers trying to control his red ring of death that he's got. Do you guys got anything for this montage?
I think it's just, pretty standard montage. I think the varied powers that they have, how all of them are so different, I thought was pretty cool. And again, it reiterates that they chose X-Men that had cool visual powers that didn't really matter. Other than that, we see all of them are kind of overcoming something, right? Banshee apparently had a fear of heights. Havoc is learning how to control things. Mystique is coming to terms with the beauty of her blueness. Magneto is learning how to channel not only his rage, but his, happy thoughts as well. There's a fairly Hook-style moment that happened with that point. But yeah, each of them are kind of learning to channel their powers and learning that together, they can work best because each of them have a particularly unique set of powers.
And it's kind of funny going back to Darwin, because if he was in this montage, really, what would he be training?
He would have been the dummy that Alex Summers was sending his
yeah.
That's probably really what it would have been. That's funny. But that's probably one of the reasons why they kill him off, too, is, he just didn't have an arc or anything. He was already a fully formed character, basically, by the time we got to him. But this is, I don't know if I've said I've had a favorite part yet, but this is my favorite part of the movie. The part where Charles does access, asking him basically for permission. So we're starting to get a tiny bit of an arc and respect from Charles as he goes into Eric's mind and he pulls a memory of him with his mother. And we know from the beginning Charles' mother was never really there for him. And we know Eric's mother was literally ripped from him. So in this moment that they're sharing memories, they're sharing the same emotion, and they're in that same place of we just both want to be loved and accepted in our lives. And that is where they meet that middle, that peace and serenity. That is where their middle comes from. That anger and that fear mixed with that love is where both of their friendships and why they can overcome a lot of their differences a lot of the time is that moment right there. And it is, I have goosebumps even talking about it. I remember crying my eyes out the first time I saw it. It is, I don't even know if Fassbender says anything through most of it. And the acting he does is just round of applause by the time you get done with that. And Charles gives him a look, James McAvoy, right after, of just, and then he says, "What? Thank you for sharing that memory with me."
Yeah,
I didn't know I had that anymore. Oh,
oh my God, that part is amazing, right? And like you've been saying, how Xavier spends this time kind of invading people's thoughts without a second to question it. And the fact that he asks, experiences this memory, says, that was beautiful, thank you. That part is so strong for both of them, and that is probably the best acting that happens kind of throughout the whole piece.
Yeah, they're teaching each other, even if Charles doesn't realize it too. Oh man, and then so this whole time in the background, Shaw's been manipulating both the militaries to go a little Cuban Missile Crisis. And so this is the moment we get the JFK speech. They finally have their talk about how this isn't going to end in peace, and we kind of get their ideologies a little bit laid out for us again right after this beautiful scene they just have together. And then we get a Beast injecting himself, and we don't get to see anything what happens after that until they all suit up to go leave and go fight Shaw and his groupies, and that's where we get Beast coming back as Beast, and we get the jet, we get the outfits. You guys got any thoughts on any of this?
Yeah, I want to start really fast. That's, I think, an awesome part because, like we've said, there are so many good arcs. Magneto's arc, the attempted arc of Charles, obviously Mystique as well. But this is Beast's really good one because Xavier says something about the arc of Robert Louis Stevenson's Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and he says you have to embrace the Hyde, you have to embrace the Beast, you have to embrace this thing to unlock your true potential. And it's so much of it is Hank McCoy suppressing that and trying to hide that, and he's not able to achieve the greatest things that he is able to do. And then ultimately when he tries to erase that part of him, he does the opposite, and that's what allows him to truly become, the person that he was meant to be. And that scene where he reveals himself, and Eric says, you've never looked better, and he chokes him, and he's like, I don't want you to mock me. Don't ever mock me. And Magneto's like, no, I was serious, right? I see that there's great potential in you, and I see that this is who you should be. And that's such a huge part for Beast to hear that. But it also just cements Magneto as this tragic hero of this film as well.
I agree completely that it was a great arc in his character, but I think it was so dumb. He's this genius scientist. He's the only guy that can fly this plane, and he's injecting this serum in him, which he has no idea what it's going to do, right before this big mission. Just dumb on the part of being one of the smartest people on the planet.
That's the best part of it, though, because his shame outweighs his intelligence, right?
I guess.
That is honestly, yeah, that is exactly what it is. That's cool, is that he's willing to ignore every other aspect of his life just to get rid of these feet that nobody else even notices except for him. Which is, it's such a true thing, which is real life in general, is we all have these little things that we'd want to change that about 99.9% of everybody around us doesn't notice, except for that's all we notice about ourselves. And that's what Hank McCoy is in that moment, is he doesn't see himself as the smart scientist, as the guy who's built these flight suits and ships. He sees himself as a freak, as a clown, as Bozo, that even his friends freaking still make fun of him. Even these other freaks still make fun of him. And so that's why he needs to just look past everything. And it's sad. It's so sad.
Dude, that was really good. I really liked that part of it.
Dude, for sure.
Holy cow.
And I want you guys to know I wrote everything in black pen except for I wrote Beast Transformation in blue pen and anything about Azazel in red pen.
Nice. There you go. We got a color code.
That only I will ever see. And then so we finally get, the team is together, and we get towards our climax as we are going to the Cuban Missile Crisis, and they're all suited up, and it's the Hellfire Club, Sebastian Shaw's crew, against the crew of the X-Men, the First Class. Do you guys got anything cool, interesting to say about this fight here at the end?
Did we talk about their costumes at all?
I just mentioned that they got new costumes. I figured you'd be able to go into all of those, what the costumes actually signify and stuff better than I would.
Well, what did you guys think of the costumes?
Troy?
I mean, I liked them. Honestly, I would have to maybe look at a picture of them one more time to really. I just watched this literally today. It's the second time I've seen this movie. Let me pull up a quick picture.
Yeah, right. They're just kind of they're flight suits, right? And they explain it away, right? Because there's this obsession with, well, we have mutants, but we've got to figure out why they would wear costumes. I still don't understand that, but they talk about how if you're going to be pulling 0 Gs or whatever, however many Gs, you're going to need to wear a flight suit like this. But they're blue, and they've got this yellow design down the middle, and they're punctuated by these straps and all those different types of things. But they obviously are meant to evince or evoke the ideas of the actual classic costumes. which have, you know, this huge yellow stripe down the middle of the navy blue suit. And so they do a really great job of kind of speaking to, while also modernizing that classic costume. And so I thought it was cool, right? From 10 years of just black leather being the superhero costume that we got from them, it showed that they had a little bit more of a commitment to actually giving them the costumes that we recognize. So I liked them a lot.
Yeah, I think what Troy said is honestly almost perfect, and something that studios haven't realized until super recently is like the costumes don't really stick out the way that they think they stick out. They stick out to us is because I've seen tons of pictures of the original X-Men with Beast and no fur wearing that ridiculous freaking blue and yellow stuff. So like seeing just those colors and you know what that is, that brings an emotion of just like, this is awesome. This is what we've wanted. But to somebody like Troy, who's probably never looked at the 60s comic books before, it's like, yeah, I guess these are cool costumes, but they don't really play a part in anything. And I think that's exactly what the costumes should do in the movie, is give a reason for them to wear them. Don't make them an important plot point to the point that it actually distracts you from what's going on in the movie. I thought it was, the perfect amount of fanfare.
I agree.
And then we get... All right, and then we just get some of them fighting. This is where we get to see Banshee full-on flying around, which I think visually freaking looked awesome. Like I said, I wasn't super pumped for him to be in the movie, but the way that this actually ends up looking, I think, looks sweet. He has a couple cool fights. I like the Azazel Beast fight a lot, where it's just almost like a freaking brawl, just like a fist fight almost, where the powers are coming less in handy and it's just them trying not to disconnect from each other so he can't teleport. And I just kind of like that they got to get creative with all of these random powers that they all have in this last scene.
Yeah, right. I thought that the fight was super well choreographed, right? And it moved from one character to the next, to the next, to the next. And we saw how their powers kind of worked seamlessly together, right? They didn't have the trope of, well, we're paired off against these people, and in order to win, we have to switch, and we have to fight, the person who is the opposite of us. And they didn't have this line where, we were strong by ourselves, but we're even stronger together. And so they avoided all of this kind of low-hanging fruit, but they just went from one to the next, to the next, to the next. And that Beast fight that you were talking about, Beast and Azazel are fighting, and then ultimately it gets to this point where Azazel's going to puncture Beast's eye with his tail, and then Mystique comes out pretending to be Shaw and distracts him long enough for them to kind of attack and to recover, right? So from one to the next, to the next, to the next, right? Banshee catches Havoc. Havoc, uses his power to defend, to protect one of his teammates. And so we clearly see that the teamwork aspect is there, but they didn't feel the need to tell us that, we're working as a team now, and so that's why it's all working. And so I thought that worked very, very, very well.
Yeah, I agree. So the only thing I have to say bad about, I guess, Mystique's character, and it's probably just because it's in the contracts who she is. She's got to be this big role, but like she's not too much of an offense player. Like she has that good moment where she saves him, but what else can she really do in like a situation like that? I feel like she's more of a liability even being there, which is.
Yeah, and in those big battle scenes, it does have to be a little hard to find a role for a character who, like you said, her powers aren't inherently offensive. She's a stealth character. That's why they used her so well in the original trilogy. Is she's almost never Mystique. She's almost always all these other characters. She's always breaking into something, getting codes, doing this or that. So just doing the Shaw thing at the end, I thought was cool. But otherwise, she does kind of fall into the background a little bit here, which isn't great for her character, but I understand, just because it isn't super visually interesting to give her something to do there. And they're trying so hard to give these other characters. It's like, how is somebody who can turn into the random guy, fight a guy named Riptide,
Man, he gets wiped out of that battle so fast.
And then we get, so then Eric eventually breaks into Shaw's submarine, and we get him fighting, and this is where we get to see a little bit of how strong Shaw is again. He's able to just like touch Eric, and he goes flying. He's wearing the helmet, so Charles can't get into his head. you guys have any thoughts on this last little showdown between these two? Excuse me.
I like how it's juxtaposed against the chaos of the battle that's happening outside, and then there's this clear, battle that's been building throughout the entire piece, right? And one of the key things, obviously, is that Shaw is too powerful for Magneto to take on by himself, and so he and Charles, they have to work together to battle him, right? And so Eric is obviously using his magnetic powers. Charles is attempting to get into his mind, and so once they break the mirrors. And they allow Charles to kind of get in there, and once Magneto is able to remove the helmet, they need each other for the mission to succeed, right? And they need each other to ultimately prevail, which I think is a major message, is that each of them balances each other so well, right? Eric keeps Charles hungry and keeps him understanding that the mutant cause is something that's worth fighting for, and Charles obviously attempts to temper Eric's anger and his rage and his lust for revenge. And so the fact that they complete each other is seen clearly in the fact that they need each other to win that battle.
I agree, and they did a really good job of showing that. And then going back to the helmet thing, is that thing metal? Because I didn't understand why Eric couldn't just rip that off of his head.
Yeah, right. And he uses electrical cords that have metal in them or something, or cables to take it off of his head, just pluck it from his dome. Yeah, I guess I don't know. I always thought it was metal. They have a throwaway line that explains that in the movie, but maybe the Russians don't make helmets with magnetized metal.
Gosh, yeah, I was hoping one of you two had the answer for me on that one too, because this scene is right up there with one of my favorite scenes in the freaking movie. It's just that one thing where it's like, wait, why did he have to fray these wires? Why couldn't he just grab it? But if neither of you guys heard anything, then whatever, I'll just forget it, just because the moment after is so good. When he finally takes the helmet off, Charles freezes him, and then we get Charles basically just begging Eric not to put the helmet on, begging him not to do what he knows he wants to do so badly. And the sound editing it is so good when the helmet slowly starts to go on Eric, and you hear all of the noise being taken away from Charles and all the power being taken away from Charles. And then he gives Sebastian the speech about how he believes with all of his ideologies, and he believes mutants are next to take over the world. We're the next step of evolution. We are more powerful than humans. And I agree with you on everything, but you killed my mother. And then he sends the freaking coin that we knew we'd see again from the beginning.
Chekhov's coin!
and the parallels they do with Charles trying to freaking get him out, and you're going on back and forth, and this coin going through Sebastian's head, and you can see that it's physically hurting Charles as well as emotionally, but he can physically feel this pain being inside of Sebastian's head, as Magneto's also figuratively breaking his heart. And this is the divide that then completely breaks their, I guess I shouldn't say friendship because they keep a friendship, but their partnership in the movie. This is the moment that Magneto isn't going to come back from, and Charles realizes he can't bring him back from that moment, which is, yeah, it's definitely one of the best parts of the movie. Just basically any time freaking Fassbender and McAvoy are doing something on screen is just so good in this movie.
Yeah, right. And so this is supposed to be the moment that breaks Magneto and makes him a villain, right? But again, I have no problems with this, right? Kill this guy you want in the most brutal ways possible, from the things that he has done and the fact that he is a freaking Nazi. Whoops, I don't feel badly for him at all. So you further your mutant agenda all you want. I thought the scene itself is so beautiful with the way that the coin goes in and it's pure and it's clean, and it comes out with the blood and the viscera. And, it shows this tremendous change and this visual change that now there's, blood figuratively on Magneto's hands that can never be washed away. I think that part is so magnificent.
Yeah, everything, the writing in that part, yeah, the acting, and like you said, just the visual cues, such as the coin, all of that stuff it was just done so well. And it makes you so sad because you're so invested in those two, specifically their friendship at that point. But apparently if you're evil like John, then you kind of are on board with all of that, but whatever. But then right after that, they go outside and they realize that all the humans have turned on the mutants, and they're going to send all of the missiles their way. And this is Eric's chance to him to show Charles just how evil humans are. And this is where Charles is telling him the last time, this is where we can finally be better than them. This is where we can finally prove it. And he doesn't. So Charles, and I love that it comes down to an honest-to-God wrestling match between the two most powerful mutants alive at that point, because Sebastian Shaw's dead. And they literally just have like a wrestling match fist fight. And
yeah, right. They refuse to use their powers to do it because obviously the helmet causes that to be impossible. But yeah, they fight in the most human way possible, which totally, if they are homo superior, it brings them down to the level of their inferiors, and I love that part as well.
And then what happened? Moira tries to shoot Eric. Eric blocks the bullet, and there's a point where all the X-Men then try to help Charles, and Eric in a subtle throws every single one of them except for Raven still standing there, which is so cool.
Yeah.
And then he's blaming the shot on Moira, and it's her fault. And this is finally where Charles has to talk with him about how it's your fault. You did this. And Eric saying, we could do this together. Will you be by my side? We want the same things. And Charles says, like the audience now definitely knows, is no, we don't, my friend. We don't want the same thing. And then that's where their divide happens. That's where Professor X and his academy freaking get born, and that's where the Brotherhood of Mutants get born. And they separate. Mystique decides to leave with Charles, which when I first watched this, I didn't super understand. But the more I've watched this and the more I've paid attention to her character arc, it does make sense. But it's almost like the Hank McCoy thing. Because I just wish this could have been just let out hang to dry a little bit longer. Just the Hank turning into Beast and Mystique turning over to Eric, just because the brotherhood she had with Charles throughout the whole movie is just, it's kind of a hard turn to make, but I feel like they almost didn't know if they were going to make any more of the prequels, and so they just kind of had to get everybody to where they were.
Yeah.
And so Charles all of a sudden is in a wheelchair, the brotherhood is born, Mystique is now a bad guy, the school started. It's basically everything just starts to get wrapped up tight at the end here. You guys got any point of views on this ending here?
Well, I do have a question. I don't know if you guys will know this, maybe John. Obviously, in the comics, I'm assuming Xavier isn't paralyzed because of a bullet, or is that true to the comics? That the reason?
I think there have actually been a couple different explanations of it. I know that there's one where he's impaled by a piece of metal while they're in the Savage Land, but I think it happens from an accident again, and I think Magneto is involved. They've retconned and gone back and changed it a couple different times, though. And like I said, when the X-Men comic came out, these people were all established already. So he was in a wheelchair at the time that it began. And we've had a bunch of different stories, but it wasn't a bullet, and it wasn't during the Cuban Missile Crisis. But it was, this relationship, this frayed relationship between Eric and Charles that paralyzed him in the comics as well. This last scene, I kind of forgot about, because obviously when Magneto kills Shaw, that seems like a natural, conclusion for it. But then again, afterwards, the humans are like, well, these mutants, they saved us. They saved the entire world from experiencing World War III, but let's kill them all instead so we can rid ourselves of the problem. And so the whole concept of humans and mutants not being able to live in harmony that Magneto preaches and that Magneto realizes is basically proven true. And I get that we're supposed to take the moral high ground, and Charles says we shouldn't be as bad as them, we shouldn't stoop to their level. But you got to understand kind of why Magneto makes those choices as well. And so they do a really great job of creating this morally gray area where Magneto is not a villain and Charles is not a hero, but they exist on this scale, or this kind of this spectrum of good versus bad, but kind of they're realistic people rather than caricatures, which is so weird in an X-Men movie where you see a ton of realism rather than cartoon caricatures that are kind of all over the place.
I agree. It all comes back to that line of where everything somewhere in between serenity and fear, or serenity and anger, whatever he says, That everything isn't just those highs and those lows. Everything usually comes down in the middle, and that's what you need to find to have those healthy relationships and understandings and dynamics. And also, I didn't like the fact that they all just immediately shot at all of the mutants almost immediately. And I understand why they did it. It's because comes back to the following orders things. But it was just like almost instantly all of them starting to shoot at each other, and that's what ended it. It just all seems sudden, but I think it's just all because the end of the script, eventually they just kind of had to wrap things up. The movie at this point was like getting over a little 2 hours, and they were just trying to wrap up things fast. Just felt like all of a sudden all these things that were taking really delicate times with was all of a sudden just rushed at the end. But like you said, I think that the idea behind all of that is so spot on, where Charles is willing to be this martyr, but then that's going to kill all of these people. And who's that saving? Who's that martyring for? What is that proving a point to? That it does, yeah. Just puts you in this smack dab in the middle of you want to be on one of their sides, but you don't really know who to choose. Despite the fact that at the end, Magneto comes full Magneto costume here to break out Emma Frost. Did you guys like his costume at the end?
Yeah, I did actually. But it's funny, I don't know if we talked about this, going back to the Emma Frost thing, because I asked if she was, I don't know if we mentioned this, how she's Diamond, it's supposed to be unbreakable. But he breaks her neck with that bed early on.
Like with a brass bedpost, right?
Yeah, and that's why I asked, like, okay, is she Diamond? Because that bed's got to be, like, not even steel.
Yeah, right.
I read a little bit about this, and all I got from it was basically that Diamond can be broken. It just can't be scratched. And so if you would take a hammer, you could crush a diamond. And so if you put enough pressure on a diamond, you can break it, but you just can't scratch the surface of a diamond.
Weird.
And so I'm assuming that that's what's insinuating, except for it looks like it's a brass bed pole.
Yeah.
It's super shorthand, but apparently it is possible, because that was the first thing I thought of, like, wait, isn't diamond supposed to be like the hardest material in the world? And it's just, it's impossible to scratch the surface of a diamond, but apparently you can, with enough force, crush diamond.
But that part was also so dope when he's like, if she ever turns into a diamond form again, just tap her lightly and her head will fall off. What? So, like, I don't care about the explanation of it. It was pretty sweet, that part.
Yeah, for sure. And because I had the same question right away. As I was like, does that make sense? I'm not sure. Let's look it up.
Not a diamond expert, but yeah, that part at the end where he rolls in with his Brotherhood and he's got, the embellishment on the front of the helmet, that little horn that comes off. That's straight out of the original Magneto costume. And the fact that he wears the classic red and purple that combines both the old comic and kind of Ian McKellen's more, I guess, kind of officer-style military outfit that he wears, I thought that was really cool. And it looked kind of silly, but he just spent this whole movie being, such a powerful character that you don't even care, right? He's able to pull it off so well. Kind of looked like M. Bison from Street Fighter as well.
Ooh, that's definitely a good comparison. Yeah, I was 1,000% into this outfit, and I was so jacked because I was like, oh man, that means the next movie he's going to wear this outfit the entire freaking movie. This is awesome. And, of course, we'll eventually get to that. But, yeah, no, I was jacked. It was a lot like the first-class outfits in general that they wore at the end. It was like, okay, now this is a shout-out to the original. We're getting away from taking everything to the muted as we possibly can versions of the costumes, and we're embracing a lot of those flourishes that maybe we were embarrassed to do 10, 15 years earlier. Which, yeah, I thought was awesome. And then we get the Superman 2 ending, where Charles starts a school, and he brings Moira McTaggart to the school, and he gives her the kiss that makes her forget everything that she needs to forget for him to keep living his life, apparently.
I was wondering if he really did that, or she was just pretending that happened. But
he really did that. That's why I was definitely going into that. There's not a real character arc here for Charles. I would like to think that he did get over the fact that he could just like do whatever he wanted to people's memories with the Eric thing, learning that like I need to respect these and stuff. But then he just takes away all of her memories at the end. So that's not a great thing to do for our hero of the series. But then the reason I like that he does it, I think it's not a great ending, but I like it because it sets up him maybe having an arc in the next movie where he's still dealing with some of those things and still trying to become maybe the hero we think he is in the original trilogy.
Yeah, and I think that's the growth that they have him on, because he is so flawed in this movie, and ultimately he ends, and it's kind of like a Empire Strikes Back ending where he is so downtrodden and he is so, kind of ashamed of who he has become, right? He's in the wheelchair. He says, I'm a professor. I'm old. I'm going to be losing my hair soon, which is another, reference to how he's bald. But, we see that there's definitely more that he needs to accomplish. And obviously, knowing what happens in the next two movies, we see that that's something that he wrestles with kind of consistently throughout all of these different pieces and all of these different elements and parts of the trilogy as well.
Agreed. All right. Well, that's our X-Men First Class review. Now, before we start wrapping up, let's see here. Do we have any roommate reviews in the house tonight?
I have a de facto roommate review. I alluded to this before. I watched it with my 5-year-old son, and so I asked him today if he'd write me a review. It's a little bit disjointed because he does not be the greatest writer, but he says, I love Banshee. He's my favorite X-Man because he can fly. And I said, what else? What else about him do you like? He can fly. That's all we need. I said, what did you think of the movie? He says, great. Beast turns into blue, and I really like that part, he says. Magneto, awesome. Magneto is awesome. He says it's too inappropriate. I had to close my eyes too often. Also, more Wolverine, please. He was a meanie in this movie. I said, Jack, who is the bad guy in this movie? And he had no clue, no idea who the bad guy was. Didn't remember Riptide. That was surprising to me. The being on the precipice of World War III was the real villain of the movie. Didn't get that part either. Azazel is the best bad guy.
Oh my gosh. He didn't understand the World War III point of his?
No, he sure didn't. The nuance of the Cuban Missile Crisis was lost on him.
All right. All right. Now, after that review, let's see if we can follow that up with the ratings of our own, with our own rating system. Do we have a name for our rating system yet, boys?
Marvelous Movies and Their Reviews.
All right. It's the Marvelous Movies and Their Reviews rating system.
You can workshop that name a little bit later if you want.
Yeah, we're just workshopping some things right now, all you fans and audience members out there right now. But just to give you guys a little reminder, in case you haven't made it through the 2 hours of Fantastic Four review. So it's a 1 through 5 rating system. It starts number 1, the worst is irredeemable. 2 is unworthy. 3 is infamous. 4 is amazing. And a 5 out of 5 is uncanny. And these, of course, are all based off of comic books from the Marvel series. Irredeemable Ant-Man, Unworthy Thor, Infamous Iron Man, Amazing Spider-Man, and Uncanny X-Men. So we thought we'd adopt that for our rating system since we're doing comic book movies. And so let's start with Troy. On a scale from irredeemable to uncanny, what will you give 2011's X-Men First Class?
I think I will give it a 4, amazing. Again, I just rewatched this movie. I think it's only the second time I've seen it, and I really realized how it might actually be one of my favorite X-Men movies. Maybe Days of Future Past a little above it, and Logan, of course, but it's kind of just... So anyway, it'll be third then. But, I did really, really enjoy it. I really like the casting. Again, I love McAvoy. I love Fassbender. Yeah, it was an enjoyable movie that wasn't as bad as Fantastic Four, which I think we gave 2. So, but yeah, I'm going to put it at a 4. Amazing.
All right, an amazing from Troy. John, what you got?
I mean, it being X-Men, I would love to give it an uncanny and kind of match those things up. But thinking about it and kind of going through it, I think that this established a really good baseline. It established a really good kind of point. And so I'm going to go with a 3 with an infamous, right? There are things that it's doing well. There are things that leave a lot to be desired, right? We talked about the bevy of no-name characters. We talked about kind of the idea of sharing time. We talked about the idea that sometimes the backdrop of that political intrigue kind of takes away from what you want in a superhero movie, and it can be a positive and a negative, right? You see that, you know, they're trying to ground it in reality, and they're doing a really good job of that. But at the end of the day, you know, sometimes those war room scenes aren't necessarily what you want from a movie like this. And so for the potential, I think that it's incredible. And the universe that it's set up and the rights that they started to, or the wrongs that they started to right, I think gives it a lot of credibility. And so I think a 3. It's a pretty good score. Obviously, it's higher than average. But I'm going to go with a 3 in Infamous on this one.
All right. So we got an infamous and an amazing. All right. Going back to this movie, I was pretty excited because I remember really liking it. There's a ton of stuff that I wasn't a huge fan of, which we talked about. Just like John mentioned, some of the side characters. Some of the things like at the ending wrapping up a little too tightly for me. Not knowing if they were going to make another one, probably. I'm assuming that's what that is. So they just ended a lot of the stuff that they didn't end, like the wheelchair and all that stuff. But all of the McAvoy Fassbender stuff is 2 of the best character studies I've seen in any freaking comic book movie by 2 of the better actors I've seen in any comic book movie. And every single time they're on screen, it is, if it was just them, it would be an 8 out of 10 for me. That's all that stuff's so good. If you're getting me to cry in a scene where only one of the person's talking and they only say 2 lines, you're usually doing it right. I loved Kevin Bacon as Sebastian Shaw. We didn't talk a ton about him in the role itself, but I thought he did play the role awesome. He played it perfectly scummy in the beginning with his chocolate and trying to freaking manipulate Magneto throughout the movie. I think he does a really good job of showing us just how threatening of a character he is. I thought they did well with Beast and Mystique with their arcs, even though I wish they would have dragged those out a little bit more like I talked about earlier. But I enjoyed pretty much all of the actual main plot stuff they did throughout. It doesn't quite get to the highest of the high. Just thinking about some of my movies that I would say is the highest of the high, it doesn't quite reach those bars for me. But it is so close to being an uncanny for me, but not quite there. So I'm giving it the highest possible amazing I can give it. And there we go.
Nice. Excellent.
So we got an infamous and we got 2 amazings. And now, before we start wrapping up, we're going to hit a new segment that we like to call Recommended Reading by John Strand. And I'll just let him explain what this is.
All right, and so, you know, when Trevor contacted me about this is something that he and I have been talking about for a few years now. And so we finally got an understanding of how technology works, kind of, and we're able to launch into this. So part of it is he loves the movies, he loves the TV shows, the cartoons that we grew up on, lived together, comics together pretty regularly. And so I want to just kind of get him reading comics again. And for our, 7 subscribers, I want to get them and what kind of comics are out there as well. So for each of the different weeks and each of the different movies, I wanted to talk a little bit about some, recommended reading, some arcs, some artists, some storylines that I thought work well with the subject matter. And so these are obviously all X-Men runs here. And so a couple of different things that I wanted to go through. My first recommended reading is a title called The All New X-Men that came out in 2012. And because we read through or we watched X-Men First Class this week, this is the first thing that jumped out at me. Because this is a really interesting storyline where Beast, again, attempting to right wrongs and attempting to, solve, situations that are usually beyond the grasp of mere mortals. He actually time travels the original X-Men to the much more modern day of the X universe. And so the young Jean Grey, the young Cyclops, the young Beast, the young Angel, the young Iceman, they come to a modern Marvel universe and they meet their counterparts, right? They see the older Cyclops and all of the mistakes and decisions and wrongs that he has perpetrated, right? They come back and they find out that Jean Grey was taken over by the Phoenix and has passed away, right? They find out that Beast is transformed into this blue creature that he sees before him now. And so it's really interesting to have these kind of young, wide-eyed X-Men see their adult counterparts and what they've endured and what this war-ravaged timeline has really done to them. And so it's really interesting. It's some of the best reading that I've done, and it survives. And those characters exist kind of in concert with each other, and they have for the last 8 years basically of comics. The next one on my list is an event called House of M. I think Trevor actually read this one back when we were living together. And House of M is an alternate reality where instead of being subjugated and instead of being outcast, the mutants are actually the dominant form of humanity. And I thought that this works really well with the movie we just watched, because Magneto's dream that he understands at the end of the movie is that mutants should be dominant and humans should be submissive. And this is actually a case where we see that. And so it's a pretty short 8-issue run, I think. There are obviously, many tie-ins, but you can knock that out fairly quickly. And it's really interesting because you see these characters, these mutants, and they're depicted in a different light. And some of them have personality changes, some of them have costume changes, and it was a really good alternate universe story. One other thing that we talked about was that this movie gave, an opportunity to the lesser-known characters. So one thing I had there is the X Factor series. It came out in 2005. And that has characters like Wolfsbane and Strong Guy and Multiple Man, and all these characters that nobody really knows who they are. Monet St. Croix. And so I thought that was really interesting, and basically what it is it's an X-Men title where they are a private eye detective agency. So that one is really good and really speaks to the lesser-known characters from that X-Men universe. And then the last one is just total fan service. It's X-Force from 2010, and the X-Force is the team that does the jobs that the real X-Men can't do because they're too dirty. And so this is a squad that's assassinating people. This is a squad that's doing kind of the dark ops. And it's got Wolverine as its leader, but it has characters like Psylocke and Archangel and Deadpool, and this guy called Phantom X as well. And so that's a really dark and gritty X-Men, and that's kind of what people want from it. And so their costumes are all black and silver and chromed out. And so that's a really, really, really interesting kind of adult-themed X-Men series. And so those are the ones that I think, you could check out. You could take a day or take 2 days and kind of read them. They're all on Marvel Unlimited, which I think is a really good deal if you want to read some old comics. And so that's my recommended reading for the week.
Ooh, I have one quick question about the X Factor one. Wolfsbane?
Yeah.
Who Arya Stark is in the new Mutants movie, right?
Yeah, Ron Sinclair. I mean, or Rain maybe is what you pronounce it, but yeah, she's this Irish mutant that has a little bit of a werewolf within her. And so a lot of the same tendencies of Beast and a lot of the same questions about, who she is. And I think she was actually in the X-Force as well. And so she's a really cool character that I was introduced to because of X Factor. And if you would have told me that Multiple Man would have been one of my favorite X-Men, I would have thought you were crazy because his power set seems so dumb. But the way that they develop it over this series is incredible.
That actually pumps me up. I wanted to read some Wolfsbane stuff, actually, ever since I heard Arya Stark was going to play her. So, all right. Well, I think that's it for this week then, boys. So what we plan on doing next week for all of the millions and the millions of Super Friends Review fans is we will be back with the 2002 Spider-Man starring Tobey Maguire. And so until then, it's goodbye for my friend John.
Goodbye
from my enemy Troy.
See you guys. That's such a delay.
All right. Until then, we're up, and away from our computers. See you guys.
See you guys.